television pole. We'll be taking a command module television picture and a 16 millimeter photographic record of the EVA transfer. After we get the camera set up and we start out, Charlie will come up to the hatch and he will be tending the umbilical that provides me with my oxygen and pressurization. So he'll be standing in the hatch, and then I'll go ahead and start back. I'll go back to the back end of the service module. We have a set of shoes that I can slip into that will anchor my feet, leave my hands free to work on retrieval of the films, removal of the protective coverings. We'll pull out the pan camera cassette. That's the large one. It's about 85 pounds. It's fairly good size. We'll pull it out. I'll bring it back to the cockpit, pass it in to Charlie in the hatch. He'll pass it to John, and they'll stow it somewhere inside the command module. After I've returned the pan cassette, we'll go back and get back into the what we call the Dutch shoes to anchor my feet, pull out the mapping camera cassette, which is considerably smaller, bring it back to the cockpit, pass it inside.
Our guest today is Dr. C. Jackson Grayson. He is the chairman of the Prize Commission and is the dean on leave of the law school at Southern Methodist University. Welcome back to Dallas, Dr. Grayson.
Thank you, only it's the business school, not the law school.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to make you a lawyer instead of a businessman. I apologize, having known better. But at any rate, your visit back to Dallas today is quite timely in that there's a great deal of clamor for freezing of food prices now. Is there any move afoot to do so?
Well, the Price Commission is going to meet shortly to look at the data we accumulated on food hearings that we held in Washington. We will make our decision as a result of that meeting. That'll probably be next week. Now, we are encouraged by some recent developments that have happened in food prices. I'm not saying what we're going to do, but we will decide whether or not we have to act. And I'm not sure yet we do. But if it continued at the rate of increase that it did in the past, the Price Commission would act.
Now, are you talking about this Washington meeting, I believe, with the 12 largest food chains? Is this the meeting?
No, that was Secretary Connolly that called in for conversation several of the food chains and talked about them. We held hearings in Washington for a day and a half in which we invited in everyone, farmers, consumers, middlemen, and just asked them what's happening.
Anyone with an axe to grind.
That's right.
This meeting that Secretary Connolly had with the food chains, incidentally, was followed almost immediately by some reduction in meat prices. Was it the jawboning of Secretary Connolly, or was it a natural chain of events?
Well, Secretary Connolly does have a persuasive influence on anybody he talks to, but food prices had already begun to show an encouraging downtrend. Now, what he may have done is to cause that to accelerate a little faster.
Does he talk to you?
Yes, we talk every now and then.
What influence does he bring to bear on you as chairman of the Price Commission?
He really doesn't intervene in any of the policy matters. In fact, no one in the White House does. The president and the members of the White House have respected the independence of the commission. When we talk, it's merely on general matters about how's the program doing, are there any areas that we ought to look at, but not to intervene in the decisions.
You know, the last time you and I discussed this, you were completely divorced from the wage board. You didn't discuss among yourselves, look, if we give such and such price rise, will you give such and such wage increase? Does that still hold?
That's still true, Jim. That's true today.
Well, now the wages seem to the consumer who looks at the paper, go up at higher rates than prices. How do we account for this? How do we keep this escalator in line?
Well, one, they have gone up at a higher rate because of the bulge. In fact, right after the freeze ended, wages in December just shot up, with the number of retroactive payments that were required to be paid by Congress. They forced the program to pay retroactive wages, and many people feel that was deserved. But nevertheless, I think that rate has already shown signs of moderating. Now, there are some big settlements. The obvious ones are well known. But if those continued, we'd have a problem.
What was your purpose in rolling back the increase that Ford had asked for in its automobile prices?
Well, they were very close to their profit margin ceiling. That's one of the regulations that we have now beginning to bite into the profit margins of companies. And Ford was very close to their profit margins, so close that we felt if we granted them these increases, they might go over their profit margin. So we simply said no increase.
Well, now, General Motors and Chrysler, I believe, are also in line to ask for increases. Will they be rebuked?
Depends on their profit margins.
Have you had a chance to look at them yet?
No, but we're talking to the automobile companies right now about 1973 model prices, and we're trying to get an early look at what they think they're going to have to ask for.
Well, I know the automobile industry in particular cried mightily when they gave up the wages they did before the freeze, and yet when they asked for increases during the freeze, they were turned down.
Yes, but that was a freeze. Now, after the freeze was over, they had to start paying higher wages. And so you do have to have higher prices when you have higher wages. But we didn't let them have all of the wage increases then. We cut them back from the request.
Now, just recently, one of the president's economic advisors, Mrs. Whitman, I don't recall her first name.
Yes, she was formerly on the Price Commission.
Oh, was she?
Yes.
Is it Marina Whitman?
Marina Whitman.
Yes. She had said that she was quite encouraged by the stabilization of figures in February and March. Is stabilization what we're looking for, or is reduction what we're looking for?
Price restraint. The president's never said that he wanted to get the rate of inflation to zero right away. You couldn't do that without wrecking the economy. So you do have to permit some price rise, but we're trying to slow down the rate. Now, that is encouraging. February wasn't as encouraging, but March was very encouraging. The March figures for the Consumer Price Index and the Wholesale Price Index, two figures that reflect the degree of price restraint or moderation, were encouraging, and that's why she said that, and so am I encouraged.
Well, we've had these 1 month encouraging figures before. Toward the end of 1971, for instance, I believe December, the employment dropped off a bit, and we were all encouraged. Bang, it was back to 6%. Yep. Can we look at 1 month and say, oh, gee, that's encouraging? Is it going to stick?
It's encouraging, but it's not determined. That is, I do not claim that we have won the war on inflation and that the program is firmly set in place and is going to do the job. I've never said that, so I wouldn't say that about these indicators. In fact, if there's one thing I'm sure of, they won't stay the same. They'll go back up, and they'll go up and down. But the news in February and January was high. In March, it was low. So I'm encouraged, but not to the point where I say we've won.
Let's look at the thing graphically. Now, when you say things will go up and they'll come down, will the peaks be as high as the previous peaks, and will the valleys be lower than the previous valleys?
Well, the trend, we'll have a sawtooth, because that's the history of indicators over time. But the sawtooth better be on a down slope relative to the rate of inflation we had before. And if they aren't, then the Price Commission will take action to get that slope headed downward.
Now, if you had to tack a figure on inflation right now, what would it be?
You mean the current rate of
rate?
On an annual rate? I would guess that for 1972, that probably overall it's going to be about 3.5% for the entire year. Remember, we're trying to get the rate of inflation only to 2.5% by the end of the year, not today. So I'd say we're at about a level of 3.5.
All right. Let's assume that you make your goal of 3.5% overall and 2.5% by the end of the year. What will the rate of wage increases be at that time?
Well, the rate ought to be in the vicinity of 5.5%, because that's the arithmetic. 5.5% wages less 3% productivity equals 2.5% in prices. And that arithmetic is inexorable.
I know it looks beautiful. 5.5% less 3% for productivity leaves 2.5% for price increases. But isn't productivity the hanger?
It is a hanger. And if we don't get the productivity up, then you recompute that arithmetic. If productivity is only 2%, then prices will be 3.5%. So productivity is at the heart of the whole control program. And if we don't get it up, then I can assure you that there will be inflationary forces in this economy.
All right, let's go back to the situation with Ford. Let's suppose by the time their fall models come out, they can show you ironclad their productivity is not up 3%. And they do need this increase in order to meet the wage demands of their workers. Will you then grant them the price increase?
We've come out with industry-wide productivity figures, which will be announced probably next week. Those industry productivity figures will be subtracted out regardless of what the individual company productivity is. So the company has to be at the average, regardless of what their actual productivity is. That's an incentive.
So we only have about 2 minutes left, and since you're not a politician and I'm not a politician, let's talk politics. What about all the Democratic contenders who are saying that really this whole thing is a bunch of wash, it isn't working?
Well, it's campaign time, so you can expect people to be attacking a program that the administration has. I'm not a politician. I don't get mixed up in politics, and as Secretary Connolly told me from the beginning, you call it like you see it, and you let somebody else worry about the politics. That's what I'm doing. Now, I don't agree with what some of them are saying, that we should have a freeze. I disagree. I think a freeze would be bad for the recovery of the economy. And if anybody doesn't care about unemployment, then they can irresponsibly say that there is a freeze should be attacked, and I think you would have an unemployment increase.
Well, are you suggesting then, Dr. Grayson, that they are knowingly, openly lying about the progress
No, that's their belief, that that's the best way.
They really believe it?
Sure, I believe it. I don't say that any of them do not believe it. But I'm saying that from where I sit, when the information I have, that I think a freeze would not be good for this economy.
When you coming home to Dallas and fold this thing up?
As soon as we reach the rate of inflation of 2 to 3%, and I hope that's soon.
By the end of the year?
By the end of the year. That's our target. I'm not guaranteeing we'll make it, but I'm going to do my best.
Thank you very much. Our guest today has been Dr. C. Jackson Grayson. He is the president of the President's Price Commission and dean on leave of the business school at Southern Methodist University. Tried to make him a lawyer earlier, but it didn't work. We'll be back with more of News 8 at noon in just a moment. Right now, time out for this message. About putting fire prevention devices in each and every American home, which would alert the fire department.
Of course, this is, I think, probably a step down the road, and ultimately, when our technology will allow us to do this on a cost-effective basis, I think it would, of course, be a very good thing.
The morning session panel also included Senator Oscar Mazzei of Dallas. He had an important lawsuit and was unable to attend this afternoon. During the morning, the study committee heard from Tarrant County District Attorney Doug Crouch, legislator Mike Moncrief, and also from John Freedy of the Drug Abuse Center in Fort Worth. The lead witness this afternoon was the director of that center, Dr. William Foster.
Efforts at retraining, reconditioning, or whatever you want to say like this. As far as I'm concerned, don't work. Those people who are ready for that, fine, that's for them. But those people who don't want that, won't accept it.
To those of us who've been watching these hearings, both you at home and we as reporters over the past several years, a number of noteworthy changes appear in this hearing. There have been many more witnesses who at least seem to take a sympathetic attitude toward the problems of drug users. In the morning, we heard people say that it should be considered a mental health problem, and there were a number of people who testified that the laws governing the use of drugs and the possession thereof were not really fair. I talked with Senator Ike Harris, a member of the panel today. He said, well, my attitude has changed also. When you're not sure how something goes, it's safest to be against it, apparently implying that not only he, but many of his fellow senators and other legislators may just take a better view, a more liberal view, as it were, of drug problems. Jerry Taft, Channel 8 News on the Move at the Northeast Campus of Tarrant County Junior College.
Well, for the area, and if the ball club stays here, we have good fans here, and this is a good ballpark, good area, and people are really behind us. As far as the ball players are concerned, we're a young club, and we can build and learn. And if we build and learn strong, we have good talent. I think we're going to surprise people.
Wait, last year you played in the minor leagues. This year you're in the majors. Now, this has been your first year. How do you pitch different hitters? I know like a lot of established pitchers will say, well, I studied films, I played against a guy, I've studied the way the pitches he likes. So what does a guy his first year in the league, what does he really have to go on?
Well, you got to rely on what your catcher knows about the hitters mainly. And the catcher, once he learns how to you pitch, then he'll tell you, he'll give you a pitch and say, well, I know how this guy's going to throw, so I'm going to want this pitch for this hitter. So more or less you have to experiment and get experience. That's, you know, the more experience you have, the better pitcher you're going to be. And right now I'm a rookie. And
There's growing concern among the American public about a bill being tentatively introduced into the Florida legislature. That bill is called Death with Dignity, a bill that will ultimately affect us all. There's also growing concern in the medical profession that medical school and the allied health professions are not preparing their students to deal with dying patients. Several hospitals across the country are now taking the initiative, and they're instructing their staff in how to deal with dying patients. I attended one of those classes this afternoon. Afterwards, I talked to an instructor and a couple of other doctors. I asked them their amenability to the bill, Death with Dignity.
I believe that death is an experience that we all have. It's the ticket that we pay for living. I believe that I have a right not to suffer. And I think that includes not only in my life, but in my taking leave of my life. So in that sense, I support whatever the culture does to provide me with a chance to have death without suffering.
I tend to agree with Dr. Olson to a great extent. There is a definite change in the culture of America today in a concept which has been foreign to us in the past, and that is death with dignity, in which an individual should be able to choose his right to die in a specific way, and I would support that individual as a physician.
Dr. Dist?
I've seen manifested in the dying patient the fear, and to me, death in itself is not fearful. It's to some patients it's beautiful, but it's a lot of patients manifest it's the fear of dying rather than death itself. And at the end, it is, I see beauty in a lot of deaths.
Let's take a set of given circumstances. You have a terminal patient or a patient with terminal heart disease. You know the patient is not going to make it, or you feel relatively assured that he's not going to make it. However, the family wants him hooked up to the pacemaker. Then after a week or so, his condition continues to deteriorate. Now, who's going to pull the plug?
That's a real ringer of a question. That's a very naughty question, because that carries with it all of the overtones of responsibility, and it adds to it because plug pulling is a one-handed operation, and I have two of them. That means I'm capable of doing this, and it really places me under a terrific burden of responsibility. And I would guess in this case that I would look to some future cultural decision or group decision in medicine, as we have had already in the decision on when does death exist. We now have an agreeable working definition that death exists when the electroencephalogram, or the instrument which measures electrical activity of the brain, straight lines showing no electrical activity of the brain, at 24-hour intervals on two separate occasions, checked by two men of repute, two reputable physicians who are not personally involved in organ transplants. That's a working definition of death today. Now, in that same vein, I can see that the decision to pull the plug could be made by a group of people, to expect one man to accept the responsibility for this is, I would say, unreasonable, and I would not be willing to make that decision as a single man.
Has our society so conditioned us to push the question of death under the rug? Does a man have the right to say when he wants to die and how he wants to die? As one doctor phrased it, our changing times will dictate society's total reception or rejection. Only time will tell. Gene McIntyre at Fort Worth Osteopathic Hospital for Channel 8 News on the Move.
Well, you know, I was really nervous when I went out there, and 6 2/3 inning was great for me. I thought I did a pretty good job out there. Although we lost the game 2-1, I went out when we were behind 1-0, and it was cold up there, and I was getting tired because I hadn't pitched since spring training and before the strike. So I don't say I'm disappointed over anything, because I think I proved that I probably can pitch in this league, and I hope I stay.
Hey, do you plan to do anything any different against California than you did against Chicago?
Well, all you can do is just throw your best stuff, and I imagine I'll throw what I can throw. We'll go over the hitters and see what their weaknesses, and I'll just go out there and try to do a job.
Hey, since this is your first year in the majors, how does it feel to be standing on the mound pitching against a guy who has been a star in professional baseball ever since you were a kid?
Well, it's something you dream of, and it's finally reality, and I have to do it. So, and I want to do it, and they put their clothes on the same way I do, and I'm going to throw it up there, and they're going to try to hit it.
Well, I have recommended the establishment of a National Firefighting Academy to operate very much like the FBI Academy operates for police. I think it would enable us to marshal our resources for not only educating firefighters, but for education in the field of fire prevention.
Has been
the Sioux Action Group did not meet the and did not fulfill the terms of the resolution, therefore there would be no action needed.
So that a fee would go on?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I submit that the Sioux Action Group did meet these, this contract we had with the city, and unfortunately, your Park and Recreation Board figures were wrong, and we didn't know they were wrong until after the